continuing our study of Sefer Yehoshua, and we are up to Perek Tes. Remember that so far the Yidden have conquered 2 cities. They have conquered the city of Yericho. They have conquered the city of Ai. They've brought the Korban Pesach. They had the ceremony that the Torah describes in Parshas Kisavai of the blessings and the curses, the brachos and the klolais on Har Gerizim and Har Eival. They built a Mizbeach, and Yehoshua and other people inscribed the Torah, Machlekes, the whole Torah, Sefer Devarim, or the Taryag Mitzvahs, on the Avanim of that Mizbeach. And according to some, even it was done b'shivim lashain, in 70 languages. We now we continue with the discussion of what happened after all of these miraculous conquests. Vayihi kishmaya kol malachim asher be'ever hayarden bahar ubashvela ubachol chayf hayom hagadol el mul halavanain hachiti v'hamayri hakanani haprizi hachivi v'hayavusi. Behold, all of the nations on the west side of the Yarden, whether they're in the mountainous areas, the valleys, the lowlands, the plains, or all the way to the Lebanon, and these various nations heard all of these miracles. Vayiskabtsu yachdav lilachem im Yehoshua v'im Yisrael pe'echad. So they decided we have to unify ourselves. We have to be able to attack these Jewish people pe'echad, as one unit. And perhaps our overwhelming, powerful military force can destroy this nation. But there was one nation, or one city, that had a different plan. V'yashvei Givain, the inhabitants of the town of Givain, near Yerushalayim, Shamu es asher asa Yehoshua li'richa v'loi, they had heard what Yehoshua had done to the cities of Yericho and Ai, V'yasu gam hema ba'orma, because they knew, and I'll discuss the halachos in a few minutes, they knew that Yehoshua had eradicated, had killed, man, woman, and child of the 7 nations that inhabited Canaan. When a city was conquered, the population was wiped out, and they did not want to be wiped out. On the other hand, if they would simply identify themselves as people of Givon, they would be Canaanites, and they would be killed. So what did they do? They impersonated themselves as being people from other nations who came from a very long distance away, and they wanted to make a peace treaty with the Jewish people. Vayelchu vayitztaru, they went and they disguised themselves. Vayikchu sakim balim, they took sacks that were worn out, as if the sacks had gone a long way, l'chamereim, for their donkey sacks, v'nodos yayin balim, and they took wine skins that seemed to be very old and used, umavukayim, that are cracked, filled with cracks, umitzorarim, that have to be tied up in knots because of those cracks, and olos balais, and shoes that were worn out as if they traveled a long time, umitulais, with patches, baragleim, on their feet, usulamos balos aleim, and their clothing was in rags, v'chol lechem tzedam, and even the bread that they brought for their provisions, yavesh haya nikudim, was dried into little pieces that simply broke when you touched them, very brittle. In other words, they made it seem as if they were coming from a very long distance, and they were not indigenous, they were not native to Eretz Yisrael. Vayelchu Yehoshua el hamachna Gilgal, and they came to Yehoshua in his camp at Gilgal. That's where we crossed the Yarden, and that was our standard camp from which we went out and conquered various cities. Vayomer elav, and they said to Yehoshua, v'yalish Yisrael, and to all the Jewish people, Me'eretz rechaika banu, we have come from a faraway land. V'yata kirsu lanu bris, make a covenant with us, make a peace treaty with us, that you will treat us kindly. Vayomer ish Yisrael el hachivi, because these people of Givon are the nation of Chivi, one of the 7 nations. And they said to the Chivi, how do we know that you're not performing a ruse or a subterfuge on us? Ulai b'kirbi ata yoshev. Perhaps you are of the nations that dwell in this land that the Torah says must be destroyed. Eich echros lecha bris. How can we have a covenant of peace with you? The Torah specifically says, Lo sichreis lahem brit. You cannot make a covenant with the 7 nations that inhabit Canaan. Vayomer el Yehoshua, and they said to Yehoshua, in other words, the Givonim, the people of Givon who are masquerading, said to Yehoshua, Avodecha anachnu, we are your servants. All we want is peace and surrender. Vayomer aleim Yehoshua, and Yehoshua said to them, Mi atem, who are you really? Mi'ayin tavo, where do you come from? So apparently he did have a suspicion, and the strange thing of this story is they never proved that they came from Eretz Rechaika. They just said it, and Yehoshua believed them. I guess Yehoshua, they were good actors. Yehoshua was impressed by their sincerity. Vayomer elav me'eretz rechaika ma'id bo avadecha l'shem Hashem Elokecha. We have come from a very far away land, like coming from America, in order to serve your God. Ki shamanu shamo, we have heard his great reputation. V'yes kol asher asa b'Mitzrayim, everything that he did even in Mitzrayim, the 10 makos, kriyas yamsuf. And then more recently, Eis asher kol asher asa l'shnei malchei Amori, and what was done in the lifetime of Moshe to the 2 kings of the Amori, Sichon and Og melech HaBashan, on the east bank of the Yarden, that was given to Ruvain, Gad, and Chatzi Shevet Menashe, asher b'yever HaYarden l'Sichon melech Cheshbon. Cheshbon is the capital of Sichon's capital. Uli Og, and Og, the king of Bashan, asher b'Ashtaros, whose capital was in a city called Ashtaros. Vayomru eleinu zekeneinu, v'chol yoshvei artzeinu lemar, and our elders, our leaders, and the inhabitants of our land said, this is the Givonim talking, Kuchu biyedchem tzeido laderech, take for yourself provisions for this very long trip. Ulechu likrasam, and go and greet them. V'amartem aleim, and you should say to them, Avdeichem anachnu, we are your slaves. Ata kirsalenu bris, make a covenant with us. And the Givonim go on. Ze lachmeinu cham hitstayanu. When we took the bread, it was warm and fresh bread. Biyom tseisenu lolechet alechem, when we left on our trip. V'ata, and now, hine yavesh. It is dry, it's nikudim, it crunches up into little pieces, very brittle and moldy. And v'ela nodos hayayin asher milanu chadashim, and these wineskins that we had filled with wine, they were chadashim, they were new. V'hine hispako, and behold, in the course of a long trip, the skins have split. V'ela salmosenu nolenu bolu meirov haderech meod, and our shoes and our clothing has worn out and got filled with holes and cracks because of this derech. Vayikru ha'nashim mitzeidam. So the pasuk says that the Jewish people were taken in mitzeidam, from their trapping. They were entrapped by these words, and they made a brit with them. V'yaspi Hashem lo sha'alu. And apparently this was an Aveira. They did not seek guidance from Hashem, which means actually they could have asked the Kohen Gadol, who would have given them a divine response via the Urim v'Tumim, the breastplate and the jewels, and they did not ask. V'yas lahem Yehoshua shalom, and Yehoshua made a covenant of peace with them. Vayichros lahem bris l'chayosam, and he made a covenant to keep them alive and take care of them. Vayishavu lahem nisiyei ha'eda, and this covenant was enforced by a shavua. The heads of the tribes, the Nesiim, every Nasi, swore that the Givonim, that these people will not be oppressed, they will not be afflicted, they will not be killed, and we will actually see that the Jewish people are actually promising to protect them if they are attacked by someone else. We're going to see this. So this was a shvua and a bris when we thought that these Givonim came me'eretz rechaika. But we very quickly found out that that was not the case. Vayehi miktsei shaloshas yamim acharei asher karsu lahem bris. It was after 3 days, only 3 days after the time that we had this bris. Vayishmu, all of a sudden we hear, ki krevim heimei love, that these people are actually very close to us. They are indigenous, they are native to Eretz Yisrael. Uvikirbo heim yoshvim, and they dwell in our very midst. Vayisu b'nei Yisrael v'yavo el areim b'yom hashlishi. And just to check it out, to confirm this, they actually traveled to the cities on the 3rd day. And these cities are Givon, which was the main city, and the suburbs were Kefira, Be'erot, and Kiryat Ya'arim. If you live in Eretz Yisrael, you of course know Kiryat Ya'arim as Tellstone. So that is how close the Givonim actually were to Yehoshua. So really, the pasuk seems to indicate, now that we know that these are indigenous nations of Canaan, we ought to kill them. They're chayav misa. The Torah says, lo sechaye kol neshama. And yet, because of the oath, we did not. Again, I will come back to this in a moment. I want to finish the story first. V'lo hikum b'nei Yisrael, nevertheless, in spite of the fraud and in spite of the mitzvah of eradicating the 7 nations, the Bnei Yisrael did not smite the Givonim. Why? Ki nishbu lahem nesiei ha'eda b'Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Because the heads of the tribes had made a shavua in the name of God, not to harm them. Vayilonu kol ha'eda al nesiim. And the truth of the matter is, the people had tinus. Now it's interesting. The original impetus for the bris came from the people who pressed the nesiim. But now that the nesiim made a bris and we discover that this was fraudulent, the people are telling the nesiim, you shouldn't have done it. I'll just say, some things never change. The leaders listen to the people, and then the people attack the leaders. Vayomer kol nesiim el kol ha'edah. And the nesiim said to the edah, to the congregation, Anachnu nishbanu lahem b'Hashem Elokei Yisrael. We swore an oath in the name of God. V'ata lo nuchal lingoa bahem. We dare not even touch them. How can we violate a shavua in the name of Hashem? But they deserve to be punished. V'zos naseh lohem. This we will do for them. Hachayeyosam. We will let them live. V'lo yiyeh oleinu ketzef ala shavua. And therefore Hashem will not be angry on us because of the oath asher nishbanu lahem. However, vayomer aleim hanesiim, but the nesiim said, yichyu, they will live, but they will be a servants class. V'yiyu chotfei eitzim v'shoavei mayim l'chol ha'edah. The Givonim will be given the status of woodcutters and water drawers for the whole congregation, kind of a servitude. That's why in the Lashon of Chazal, the Anshe Givon and their descendants are called Nisinim. Now Nisinim is because they were placed, they were given the position of Chotfei Eitzim V'Shoei Mayim, and now Yehoshua tells them this. Vayikra lehem Yehoshua v'yidaber aleim lemor. Yehoshua calls them and he says to them, Lama remisem osana, why did you cheat us? Lemor, to say, Rechaikem anachnu mikem, we are very far away, miod, v'yatem b'kirbeinu yeshvim, but you live right next to us. And therefore, v'yata, and now, arurim atem, we cannot kill you. We have to take care of you, we even have to defend you. But you are cursed. Lo yikaret mikem eved b'chaitzvei eitzim b'shayavei mayim lebeis Elokai. There shall never cease from you a slavery to be chaitzvei eitzim and shayavei mayim. Now, this is very interesting. The Nesiim proposed that they be chaitzvei eitzim and shayavei mayim l'chol ha'edah, meaning they would be the servants of the whole congregation. Yehoshua changes it. Yehoshua actually gives them a certain elevation. And he says, you will be the water drawers and the woodcutters for the house of Hashem. This is the Mishkan and eventually the Beis HaMikdash. In fact, Nov, the city of Kohanim, we're going to read much later in the book of Shmuel, when Shaul HaMelech eradicated that city, he was punished because he killed the Givonim in the city. That were Chotzvei Eitzim, the Shoyim Emayim, and this was a violation of the oath. Vayanu es Yehoshua v'Yomer, and the Givonim answered Yehoshua, and they said they accepted their role, because they knew they got away with murder. They got away from being murdered. Ki hugad lavadeches asher tziva Hashem elokecha es Moshe avdo l'seis lahem es kol haaretz. We are very aware of the fact that Hashem had commanded Moshe to inherit the land, ulahashmid, and to destroy, as kol yoshvei haaretz mipneichem, v'nira ma'od, we were so frightened, l'nafsheseinu mipneichem, v'nas es hadavar hazeh, we did it to save our lives. V'yata hinenu biyadecha, behold, we are in your hands. Katoi v'chayosher b'einecha laseis lenu aseh. Whatever you want to do, do to us. V'yaslem kain, v'yatzil esem yad b'nei Yisrael v'lo haragum. Yehoshua spared the Givonim, and they were not killed. But v'yitneim Yehoshua b'yaymahu chaytfei eitzim v'shovei mayim lo'eda v'la mizbeach. Now here it's interesting. The Nesiim said to the Eda, Yehoshua said to the Beis HaMikdash or to the Mishkan. L'maisa, both roles were given. Yehoshua designated them to be Chotzvei Eitzim B'Shovei Mayim, both for the Eidah and to the Mizbeach, meaning servicing the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash, Ad Hayom Hazeh, to this very day, meaning whatever day this was written, but this also means throughout the period of the Beis HaMikdash, Ela Makom Asher Yivchar, till we eventually, this verse is actually after Yeshua's time, till we eventually come to the place that Hashem chooses for the permanent Beis HaMikdash, and that'll be Yerushalayim. So in Yeshua's lifetime, they service the Mishkan, and after Yeshua's lifetime, eventually when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, they did their service in the Beis HaMikdash itself. Now, I do need to spend a few minutes giving you the halachic background here, because there's a very important machlokes, Rashi and the Rambam, what is going on. The Torah does say that when we enter Eretz Yisrael, we are supposed to eradicate the 7 nations who inhabited Canaan, lo sechaye kol neshama, man, woman, child, and it is forbidden min ha-Torah to make a covenant of peace with them. According to Rashi, this is absolute. Ein achinami, before we entered Eretz Yisrael, we gave them a chance to leave, and that's why the Girgashi, that is the 7th nation, is often not mentioned, because the Girgashi got the letter and they left. They went to Africa. But according to Rashi, once the 7 nations, once the Yidden enter Eretz Yisrael, the 7 nations are going to be killed. Now, based on that, had the Givonim not engaged in their deception, they would have been Chayav Misa. They would have been killed. But the reason why they're allowed to live in violation of the halacha is because of the Shavua. That's how Rashi learns. Problem is, why would the Shavua be binding? Number one, a Shavua to violate the Torah is not chal at all. If I make a Shavua to eat chazer, I don't eat chazer. If I make a Shavua to spare somebody that is of the 7 nations of Canaan, I'm not bound by my Shavua because it is a nishba levatal es mitzvah. Number two, there's another reason why the Shavua is not binding, because it was made under fraud. If I made a Shavua because you said you were Me'eretz Rechaika, and it turns out you're not Me'eretz Rechaika, the Shavua was induced by a sheker, and it's not binding. So why are they bound by the Shavua? Number one, it's nishba levatel es mitzvah, and number two, it is a nishba based on a geneva stas, on a fraudulent misrepresentation. So the answer has to be that ein achinami, the Shavua itself is not binding. But when Klal Yisrael makes a public oath and they invoke the name of Hashem, if they then use a technical halachic reason to get out of the oath, there is what is called a chilul Hashem. People will say the Jews are not honest. You can't trust them. They don't stand by their word. So ein achinami, in Hilchai Shavua, the Shavua is vaday not binding. But mitam chilul Hashem, they dare not violate it. So the Givonim survived based on Chilul Hashem. This is the Shita of Rashi. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim has a very, very different view. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim actually learns that even after the Yidden come to Eretz Canaan, we can offer the 7 nations shalom. And if there's shalom, they can live. Now, what are the conditions of shalom? That number one, they accept. They don't have to become Jewish. They accept the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach that they have to do anyway. And number two, they accept to be subservient to Am Yisrael and to pay taxes and tributes. Now, that's the Chiddush of the Rambam, and it's only if they don't agree to those conditions that we have to kill them. So according to the Rambam, it's very, very schwer. According to the Rambam, why did the Anshe Givain have to engage in deception? They could have said openly, explicitly, we are from Givon, we are from your next door neighbors, we want to make shalom with you. Like Rashi, it's not a kasha, but like the Rambam, we want to make shalom, we acknowledge Jewish sovereignty, and we'll pay you tribute. They could have gotten what they wanted without subterfuge. The whole thing was unnecessary. So because of this, the Rambam says a big chiddush that admittedly is a little daichik, that they didn't know the halacha. They thought they would be goners no matter what they did, so they thought they had to lie, even though they didn't have to lie. But then the kasha is, okay, but why is Yehoshua saying we would kill you if not for the Shvuah? L'chayra, the Givainim were makabel the conditions of peace. So the Rambam says that even though they could have gotten preserved, had they been honest, the fact that they defrauded Am Yisrael would have created a chi of misa because of that, had it not been for the Chilul Hashem that we made a Shvuah. So it's a little convoluted. According to the Rambam, the whole lie was unnecessary. And not only that, but the lie would have been a reason to kill them, if not for the Shvuah, which then generates Chilul Hashem. So that is the end of Perek Tes.